Unhealed pain becomes the breeding ground for destructive patterns. We often underestimate the silent power of emotional wounds. Going on, they don't scream, they don't bleed, but they speak. Oh, they speak in the way we love, in the way we trust, in the way we shut down when we're needed the most. That pain buried deep doesn't just disappear because we're busy or strong or anointed. It waits. It waits in the shadows of our subconscious, shaping our responses, building walls, distorting our self-worth. And if left untouched, it doesn't dissolve. It evolves. When you've been wounded and never healed, you don't operate from wisdom. You operate from war. Your heart becomes a battleground where love and fear wrestle for dominance, and fear more often than not wins. You become defensive when you should be discerning. You lash out not because you're angry, but because you're afraid. Afraid to be abandoned again, afraid to trust again, afraid to feel vulnerable. So you build patterns, emotional habits that are meant to protect you, but they end up imprisoning you. You tell yourself you're just cautious, but what you've really done is cage your capacity to connect. Destructive patterns are not always loud. Sometimes they look like overachieving. Sometimes they look like people pleasing. Sometimes they look like silence when you should speak, or anger when you should listen. The trauma hides behind performance. It hides behind being fine. You've learned to wear emotional makeup so well, people think you're thriving. But underneath that mascara of strength is mascara running from late night tears. And in the silence of your soul, you know that the pain is still present. And it's not just affecting you, it's affecting how you parent, how you lead, how you serve, how you love. Pain has memory. It remembers what broke you. It remembers who left. It remembers when you were overlooked, abused, silenced. And without healing, that memory becomes your master. It dictates your decisions. It sets the tone for your expectations. You start to expect loss, expect betrayal, expect chaos. Not because God said so, but because pain told you it was coming. And so you prepare for disappointment even when you're being blessed. You sabotage peace because you've never learned to live in it. You reject kindness because it feels unfamiliar. You break what's healthy because broken is what feels safe. When pain is unhealed, you begin to normalize dysfunction. You begin to call it personality. That's just how I am. No, it's how you adapted. You became cold because warmth wasn't safe. You became dominant because vulnerability was violated. You became distant because closeness cost you too much. But none of that is your identity. It's your injury. And until you confront it, you'll live your life through the filter of your wound, never seeing people for who they are, only seeing them through the lens of what hurt you. Relationships break under the weight of unhealed pain. Friendships suffer, marriages crack, ministries falter, not because the enemy was so strong, but because the patterns we built from pain were never challenged. It's not the pain itself that births evil, it's what grows in the pain. Bitterness, envy, rage, control, manipulation, And we start planting those seeds in others without knowing it. Because what's unhealed in you eventually bleeds on someone else. You were wounded by rejection, so now you pre-reject others. You were wounded by lies, so now you assume deception in everything. You were wounded by absence, so now you climb too tightly or push too quickly. And all of it, every reaction, every shutdown, every argument becomes part of a pattern. You can't break patterns you won't acknowledge. And some of us are so used to survival mode that peace feels like an attack. We don't trust rest because we were trained in chaos. We don't know how to breathe unless we're fighting to. So even when God sends peace, we pick a fight. We invite drama. We start arguments, not because we're evil, but because pain doesn't know how to live without tension. It doesn't know how to sit still. It needs movement, even if it's destructive. And this is how cycles begin. What you don't heal from, you repeat. And not just in you, but through into your children, into your choices, into your legacy. Many of the generational curses we talk about are actually generational patterns that were never healed. Somebody got hurt, somebody shut down, somebody turned bitter, and they taught the next generation not with words, but with behaviors. And now you're dealing with a spirit that didn't start with you, but is manifesting in you. And if you don't confront it, you'll pass it on. But how can you heal what you've never even admitted? Healing doesn't begin at the surface. It begins at the root. You can't cast out what you keep calling normal. You can't pray away what you refuse to feel. That's why pain must be addressed. Not ignored, not rushed, not buried in scripture without process. Yes, God is a healer. But even Jesus asked the man at the pool, do you want to be made whole? Why? Because healing is not automatic. You have to want it. You have to be willing to lay down the defense mechanisms. You have to be willing to look at yourself. Not your ex, not your enemy, yourself, your own heart, your own patterns. You have to trace the pain. Where did it start? Who handed you that fear? Who planted that insecurity? Who made you believe you weren't enough? Because until you locate the root, you'll keep managing fruit you don't want. We don't need prayer. We need process. We need counsel. We need safe spaces to unpack trauma. We need truth spoken in love. We need to admit that we're not okay so that God can meet us in the rawness of our reality. God doesn't anoint masks. He anoints truth. He doesn't bless the version of you pretend to be. He blesses the one that says, I'm still bleeding. I'm still angry. I'm still scared. Help me. And in that moment, in that honesty, healing begins. Not always instantly, not always dramatically, but intentionally. One layer at a time, one pattern at a time, one stronghold at a time. Because the enemy doesn't just attack through situations, he attacks through systems, mental systems, emotional systems, family systems. He's not after your moment. He's after your mindset. Because if he can get you to accept the function as normal, he doesn't need to destroy you. You'll do it yourself. You'll run from joy you'll self-sabotage, you'll resist growth, all because unhealed pain convinced you that you're safer staying broken. But you were never called to be a prisoner of your past. You were never called to replay the pain like it's your identity. You are not what they did to you. You are not what you lost. You are not the trauma that touched you. You are the healed of the Lord. You are the restored. You are the reclaimed. And yes, there is purpose on the other side of pain, but only when pain is properly processed, only when you surrender your wounds instead of worshiping them, only when you allow God to dig deep, not just into what happened, but into what it created in you. Because it's not just the event, it's the echo. It's what still whispers when no one's around. It's the lie you agreed with when you were most vulnerable, and now you live according to that lie. You live according to that pattern, and you wonder why cycles repeat, why blessings leak, why love feels distant. It's not that God didn't answer. It's that pain distorted your reception. And until that pain is brought to the light, until that war zone becomes a place of healing instead of hiding, what we suppress in silence festers in the dark and fights us in public. There are battles we pretend we're not in because we've gotten so good at hiding the evidence. We smile through the storm, we function through the fire, and we convince the world, and sometimes even ourselves, that we're fine. But what we bury alive doesn't die. It waits. It sits in the silence, in the corners of our hearts, growing roots in our thoughts, in our behavior, in our identity. Pain has a way of making a home in silence. It doesn't need words to thrive. It just needs a place where honesty is absent. And that silence, though it feels like survival, is actually surrender. It's where the enemy builds strongholds undetected. We were never meant to carry what we weren't allowed to express. The tears we never cried turn anger we don't understand. The words we were too afraid to say turn into inner narratives that break us over time. Suppression doesn't mean healing. It means hiding. And what you hide in silence eventually shows up in your tone, your tension, your triggers. You wonder why certain things set you off, why you feel empty even when everything seems right, why you're exhausted after being around people. It's because the silence inside you is screaming, not outwardly, but inwardly. It's battling to be acknowledged. And if you won't deal with it in private, it will deal with you in public. We've been trained to be silent, trained by trauma, trained by culture, trained by fear. Don't talk about that. Get over it. That's in the past. You're too emotional. So we shrink our truth and silence our wounds to be accepted, respected, and perceived as strong. But strength isn't silence. Strength is telling the truth and still showing up. It's being able to say, I'm not okay without shame, because anything that grows in silence grows in the dark. And whatever grows in the dark becomes distorted. It becomes twisted by our unchallenged thoughts, by our internal assumptions, by our fears and false beliefs. And those things don't stay hidden forever. they leak. You can't hide pain for long. It shows up in your relationships, your reactions, your decisorship, your decisions. You think you're holding it together, but the cracks are visible. You're short-tempered. You're overly sensitive. You host people without warning. You misread kindness as manipulation. You turn down opportunities because you feel unworthy. That's not your personality. That's your pain in disguise. And it's not just emotional. It's spiritual, because the enemy doesn't just attack us with disaster. He attacks us with silence. He knows if he can keep you quiet, he can keep you captive. Because healing begins when we speak. Deliverance starts with confession. Restoration begins with vulnerability. God never heals what we pretend isn't there. He doesn't bless who we pretend to be. And yet we put on masks, hoping to protect ourselves from rejection, not realizing we're rejecting the very process that could heal us. We want resurrection without crucifixion. We want healing without honesty. But what you suppress becomes your saboteur. It begins to sabotage your joy, your peace, your progress. You'll be in rooms you prayed to be in and still feel like you don't belong. You'll be loved deeply and still push people away. You'll be applauded and still feel empty, because you cannot shout over suppressed sorrow. You cannot outperform suppressed trauma. We suppress grief because we're afraid of its weight. We suppress anger because we've been told it's ungodly. We suppress sadness because it's inconvenient. But none of those emotions are evil. They're indicators. They're messengers telling you where the wound is, where the line was planted, where healing is needed. But instead of listening, we mute the message. We scroll, we eat, we isolate, we stay busy, we quote scriptures we don't really believe in that moment because we haven't let them touch our pain. We use faith as a cover instead of a conduit. But God is not intimidated by your emotions. He created them. He can handle your rage. He can sit with your sorrow. He can walk you through your fear, but he can only heal what you reveal. When you keep it inside, it grows wild. The pain becomes paranoia. The sadness becomes cynicism. The fear becomes control. And now your whole life is governed by things you've never said out loud. You trust no one. You control everything. You expect abandonment. You prepare for betrayal. You sabotage stability, not because those things are happening, but because the silence has become louder than truth. And the longer you live with it, the more normal it feels. But that normal is not healthy. It's just familiar. Familiar isn't always safe. Familiar doesn't mean it's God. Sometimes we've adapted to brokenness so well, we mistake it for peace. You were not created to carry unspoken pain. You were created to release it, to confess it, to let it go. But release requires courage. It requires space. It requires safety. And unfortunately, not everyone has been given a safe place to speak. That's why we need healing communities, places where you don't have to be strong all the time, places where you can fall apart without being judged, places where your silence isn't mistaken for wholeness. Because silence is often a mask for suffering, and suffering in silence leads to isolation. And isolation is the enemy's playground. When you're isolated, you become your own echo chamber. You hear your thoughts bounce back to you unchallenged. If you think you're unworthy, silence agrees. If you think no one cares, silence claps. If you think healing isn't possible, silence nods its head. But when you break the silence, you break the spell. You interrupt the agreement you made with pain. You disrupt the narrative you've been living in. You make space for truth to enter. That's why the enemy wants you to shut your mouth, because your mouth is a weapon. Your testimony is power. Your confession is warfare. Your vulnerability is victory in motion. The moment you begin to speak what you were afraid to feel, you reclaim power. You regain authority over the lies. You start to shift the atmosphere around your soul. People think shouting is power, but silence, broken at the right time, is revolutionary. That's why therapy is powerful. That's why journaling is powerful. That's why talking to a trusted mentor or pastor is powerful, because the words you've never said have been holding power over your progress. But when you speak them, you strip them of their authority. You remind your soul, I'm not what happened to me. I'm not what they said. I'm not my failure. I'm not my fear. We live in a culture that celebrates performance over authenticity. That's why we have successful people who are secretly suicidal, influencers who are silently broken, leaders who are emotionally burned out, because silence doesn't discriminate. It finds its way into every heart that feels unseen, unheard, misunderstood. And once it settles in, it starts to rot the soul, not all at once, but slowly, gradually, like a virus in the background of your spirit. That's why breaking the silence isn't just emotional, it's spiritual warfare. You are declaring war on the part of you gave pain the final word. You may think you're protecting people by staying silent, but often you're just protecting your own fear of being misunderstood, fear of being judged, fear of being vulnerable. But the truth is, your silence doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone connected to you. Your kids feel it. Your spouse feels it. Your friends feel it. The heaviness you carry becomes the weight they walk on. And soon enough, your silence becomes generational. You model emotional muteness to your children, and they grow up thinking that's strength, and the cycle continues until someone speaks, until someone says, no more, until someone breaks the silence so healing can begin. What you suppress becomes your shadow. It follows you, it shapes you, it haunts you, but it doesn't have to define you. There is power in naming your pain. There is deliverance in bringing it to the light. There is freedom in saying, this hurt me, this changed me, this scared me, because confession isn't weakness, it's warfare. You can't defeat what you won't name. You can't be healed from what you pretend doesn't hurt. And you can't be whole if silence is your strategy for survival.